Yasher koach, Matt. So last year, we ended the High Holy Day season anxiously glued to the news and unable to embrace the simcha, the joy that ordinarily characterizes the end of the Chagim. And this year, sadly, we're beginning the Yamim Noraim that way, filled not only with awe, but also with another kind of yirah, the fear for our people, for our homeland, and for the lives of innocent people in the region. This is heartbreaking and terrifying and exhausting. After one of the darkest years in recent Jewish history, many of us hoped we'd be able to at least consider the possibility of putting the last year behind us. There's almost too much to say about it. And I don't believe that more analysis will help at this point, nor will it lead us into 5785 with a clearer vision. And as I've been thinking about what we might need to be hearing, talking about, contemplating this Rosh Hashanah, some questions came to mind. What does it mean for us to be a spiritual community? What does it mean for us to live out our understanding of Torah in the world? Who are we called to be as individuals and as a community in this particular coming year? I think these questions have not really felt accessible to us over the past year. In a year when we've had to be constantly reacting to what's coming at us, both literally and figuratively, taking time to reflect on our core purpose has felt like a luxury for which we don't have the time or capacity. But it's a luxury that these chagim are supposed to provide us. In fact, that's precisely what they're for. Reconnecting with our purpose, somehow attaining a sense of renewal. And even if we aren't up for a full, wholehearted celebration this year, then at least let us have that. So today I want to share two stories that bookend the High Holy Day season. And this year I've come to see them in dialogue with one another. Somehow I never noticed it before, but this year the parallels and also some of the distinctions are striking to me. The first is a story associated with Tisha B'Av, and the second is about our Torah reading today. I'm going to read almost the full text of the story from the Talmud that is associated with Tisha B'Av, but I did try to shorten it at least a bit. As you'll see, it's quite long. But I think we need to read the whole thing to understand it and understand how it speaks to us this year in particular. And often when it's presented, the whole story it's actually not presented in whole. So the story is found in Tractate Gittin on pages 55 and 56. The Gemara explains, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to a servant, "Go bring my friend Kamsa." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. He said to Bar Kamsa, You're my enemy. Why did you want to come here? Please leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, "Since I've already come, let me stay, and I'll give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just please don't embarrass me by banishing me." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamsa said to him, "I'll give you money for half the feast. Just don't send me away." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamsa then said to him, "I will give you money for the entire feast. Just please let me stay." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, "Since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of this host, although they saw how he humiliated me, they must have been content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king." He went and said to the emperor, "The Jews have rebelled against you." The emperor said to him, "Who said that?" Bar Kamsa said to him, "Go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they'll sacrifice it on the altar." The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made a blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to halacha, it's a blemish, but according to the Romans, for their offerings, it was not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar, since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this to the Romans, who did not consider it to be blemished. The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. But Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalas said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. The sages said, well, if we don't sacrifice it, then we must find a way to prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. The sages thought to kill Bar Kamsa so that he would not go and speak against them. But Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificed animals is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. This is where many versions of the retelling of this story end, but the story in the Talmud keeps unfolding, luckily, or there would be no Jewish people left to tell it. I'll get to that in a moment, but for now I want to explain why the story came to mind as I was preparing for the Chagim this year. In thinking about our Torah reading today, I wondered what we might learn from reading about Isaac's birth this year. And while this is certainly a year in which contemplating the possibility of new life, at a time when so much is working against that, when imagining that things could change dramatically in unexpected ways is precisely what we need, there's another element of Isaac's birth that stood out to me this year. And it's not quite in the verses we read for Rosh Hashanah, but it is in the same parsha, and it's crucial to the lead up to the verses that we did read today. In the earlier part of Vayera, Abraham receives guests, strangers he has never met, and his impulse is to welcome them, washing their feet, feeding them, and giving them a place to rest in the shade of his tree. Our tradition emphasizes that the story of Abraham and Sarah welcoming the guests who announce Isaac's birth is possibly meant to convey that that very act of hospitality is what merits them to have a child. And so on Rosh Hashanah, in addition to some of the complicated family dynamics that ensue, we also conjure these images: radical hospitality, new life, new possibilities, the fulfillment of promises and dreams. What happens when Abraham and Sarah welcome their guests is not only is a son born, a nation is born. And what happens when a small-minded host refuses to let the man he dislikes stay at his party, even after he has begged and even after he has offered to pay for the whole feast? That same nation is almost utterly destroyed. Now, the real story is, of course, more complicated than that, lest we ever get the impression that the Talmud comes to teach simplistic messages. It does not. Nor does it contain simplistic stories. It's important to look at the rest of the story in the historical context in which it takes place. The host's rejection of Bar Kamsa would not have led to a war with Rome had there not already been some political turmoil. We see, even in the section of Talmud I've shared so far, that the Jews were on thin ice with the Romans, or it wouldn't have devolved that quickly. But the next part of the story reveals even more internal conflict among the Jews. When Vespasian is appointed, he lays siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. This is from the Talmud. Well, that created a difficult situation. The Talmud notes that certain Jews had enough storehouses of wheat and barley to sustain everyone for 21 years. The sages desired peace and wanted to negotiate with the Romans, figuring they had some time to accomplish their goal of making peace. But the zealots insisted on fighting the Romans, even burning their own storehouses of wheat and barley so as to force the residents to engage in battle. And that also caused a terrible famine. Watching the desperate situation unfold, and knowing that it would likely result in the demise of the Jewish people, one of the sages, one of my favorites, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, tried to reason with the leader of the zealots, who also happened to be his nephew. There's one in every family. His nephew was actually convinced, but said that if he tried to say anything to the other zealots, they would just kill him, and then they'd be back where they started. So he gave his uncle another idea. And this is another part of the story with which some people might be more familiar. With his nephew's help, Yochanan ben Zakkai fakes his death and has his students carry him in a coffin out of the city for burial. When Yochanan ben Zakkai reaches the Roman camp, he endears himself to Vespasian by correctly predicting that he'll soon become king. In the middle of their conversation, a Roman messenger arrives announcing the death of the emperor. The dialogue in the Gemara is very rich, so you have to hear it. Here it is. Understanding that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple, Vespasian said to him, "If there is a barrel of honey and a snake wrapped around it, wouldn't you break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In similar fashion, I am forced to destroy the city of Jerusalem in order to kill the zealots barricaded within it." Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent and did not answer. In the meantime, as they were talking, a messenger arrived from Rome and said to him, "Rise, for the emperor has died, and the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you as their leader and make you the next emperor." Vespasian then said to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, "I will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging Jerusalem and waging war against it. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give to you," right? Because he's predicted that he will become king, so now he wants to do something kind for him. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Give me Yavne and its sages and do not destroy it, and spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel and do not kill them as if they were rebels. And lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok." And why didn't Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai request that Vespasian leave the Jews alone altogether? He didn't think that Vespasian would go that far for him, and then not even a small number of Jews would have been saved. And that's the end of the sugya. That's the full story. So while the Gemara begins this long narrative by stating that Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, a full reading of the text paints quite a different picture. This spark might have been ignited by a petty, angry man who was not shown hospitality, but the fuel was in the air and on the ground. The Romans' tenuous tolerance of the Jews, internal political division within the Jewish community, the destructive behavior of the zealots and their refusal to listen to the sages, these were the real causes of Jerusalem's demise, not Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So why did the sages want to pin it on a case of mistaken identity, while at the same time describing the whole story in such a way that anyone reading it can tell that it's not about those two men at all? For one, I think they wanted to make the point that the personal and the political are intertwined. Let's also remember that the Gemara was written by the sages, so this is their version of the story. It's basically one big "I told you so" to the zealots. But that's not really very nice. Better to bury the lead. Begin with a story that reminds people to be kind to each other and emphasize how that's even more important in times of political turmoil. We do have the sages to thank, not the zealots, for saving the remnant of Israel, and we certainly have them to thank for creating the post-temple Judaism that has survived into our lifetimes. And I'd like to suggest that it is perhaps the impulse to begin with interpersonal relationships that has something to do with our survival through many difficult times. Over the course of Jewish history, our people have witnessed and experienced terrible tragedies, mostly inflicted upon us and beyond our power to do much about. The end of the story certainly speaks to the sages' insistence that those who do have power must use it responsibly and work towards peace whenever possible. But in the beginning, with the anecdote about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the sages are providing a message for the rest of us, for the average Jew. Our tradition is calling out to us with a clear voice. We have a choice. We can be like the party host in the Kamsa story, remaining closed off to any possible reconciliation, even when gestures are made. We can be like the zealots, unwilling to compromise, and see what we hold most holy and sacred destroyed before our eyes. Or we can be like Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, finding creative solutions to salvage the remnants. But better yet, and I think this is why the Abraham story speaks to this story, we can strive to be like Abraham, guided by the ethos of hospitality, not necessarily literally washing anyone's feet, but metaphorically. Being like Abraham means to remember that God called to you, lech lecha. The promise is that if we remember our calling, our nation will thrive and grow. the sages are also reminding us to focus on what is in our control, namely, how we treat those we encounter, those in our homes, those in our community, those on the street. The story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa isn't just about hospitality. It's also about forgiveness, being open to giving someone you deem an enemy the opportunity to become a friend, or at least a tolerated acquaintance, at least someone you can share space with. And that is why this story is so fitting, not only for Tisha B'Av, but as a kavanah for the beginning of our season of repentance. Alan Liu teaches that the High Holy Days don't start with Rosh Hashanah, or even with the month of Elul. They really begin with Tisha B'Av. And he argues that by journeying from Tisha B'Av through the end of the Chagim and the range of emotional experiences along the way, enables us to finally feel joy at the completion of the season. Our liturgy puts these two stories in reverse order, right? In history, Abraham was first and was hospitable, and the host and Bar Kamsa come much later. But you could argue, it's just the fate of the calendar. The destruction of Jerusalem occurred in Av. Rosh Hashanah occurs on the 1st of Tishrei. But I think that when our ancestors laid out these 7 weeks of consolation and placed Vayera in our Torah reading for today, I can't help believe that they did so with a purpose. First, we learn about how a nation can be almost destroyed because of the pain caused when hospitality is withheld. And months later, as we start the new year, we learn about how that same nation miraculously came into being, perhaps on account of Abraham and Sarah's hospitality. And in juxtaposing interpersonal ethics with geopolitical realities, our ancestors send us a message about the future and vitality of our people, which may just depend on how much we treat each other, may depend as much on how we treat each other as it does on political realities. If I'm right about this interpretation, and who knows if I am, but it's certainly a way to look at it, then the whole setup is meant to help us reconnect with our purpose and what is in our power, and what our calling is. What does God demand of us? I think Micah really got this one right. He says, "You've been told, O mortal, what is good, and what God requires of you, only to do justice and love kindness and walk modestly with your God." This is what we're called to do. I truly don't know if it's enough. It's probably not. It won't banish anti-Semitism or bring peace to our people in our homeland. It won't solve all of our problems. But then again, most of us don't have it within our power to do that. So if we're going to be renewed this year, how's that going to happen? I think it's about coming back to our calling, what's in our power. It's really tempting to get distracted. It's really tempting to feel like we're doing so little. It's tempting to be hard on ourselves, to, when the world is chaotic, to not feel like our small kindnesses can make any difference. They can feel dwarfed and insignificant. So our sages are speaking to us this year. From page 55 of Tractate Gittin. Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, they say. Because of pettiness getting in the way of Hachnasat Orchim. Because of an unwillingness to forgive someone. But don't forget that the opposite can also happen. A nation was born because of generosity and hospitality. A mitzvah that's certainly within our reach, even if it means sharing something small. And I'm not saying, okay, when services are over today, walk around and start inviting people to your dinner table tonight. That's really too simplistic. It probably wouldn't hurt, but it's not the main point. But here's an example of what I'm talking about. Some of you know our congregation has been sponsoring 2 refugee families from Afghanistan for the past few years. One of the volunteers from our shul who works closely with the family, serving as an advocate for the kids in their schools, taking the mom to doctor appointments, helping with homework, told me that only recently did one of the family members come to understand that she's Jewish. She helps them because she loves them, cares about them, and maybe it's out of fulfilling the desire to do good, do justice, and walk humbly with God, as Micah said. But now, they have a different image in their mind of a Jewish person. And with whatever messages they might be receiving about Jewish people, they'll have a counterexample. Maybe they'll think to themselves, well, I know someone who's Jewish, if they hear something anti-Semitic, and they'll say, well, she's done so much good in my life. Again, I don't think this is going to eradicate anti-Semitism. I don't know how to do that. But these are the kinds of things that we are called to do either way. As a people, we know our calling. We have to get back to it. These chagim are here to give us a space to reflect and to remind us of our calling, to help us take time to reflect on it. And God willing, to rest, to have some peace. Please, God, let it be so. Let this raging war with multiple fronts end speedily and soon. Let the remaining hostages come home safely. Let us find a path towards peace. Let us have a year in 5785 of more rest, so we can regain the capacity and strength to refocus on our purpose. Let us come back to who we are called to be, as human beings, as Israel, as descendants of Abraham and Sarah, as the inheritors of the wisdom of the sages of Yavneh, and as members of this beautiful community. Shana Tova. In a moment, we'll rise for Chatzi Kaddish. I just want to say before we do the Chatzi Kaddish, we'll move after the Chatzi Kaddish into the Amidah individually.